let me just recording and say welcome everyone to our weekly call on the 31st of October topically. Right, let me just remind you of the agenda for the call this week, which rather helpfully my screen doesn't appear to exist. Let me just have another go at that. Try again. That's better. Right, so in terms of the sort of focus of our call this week, we'll start off with a preview of IETF 115 and just talk about some of the topics that are coming up. Then I'll just call out some of the highlights from OARC and RIPE from last week, and given that there were some other people on this call who were there, feel free to jump in with the things that I missed. And equally, by the way, as I go through the IETF preview, again, if people have spotted things on the agenda that I haven't, please sort of shout out as we do that. And then, sort of time permitting, we talk about some sort of recent developments, forthcoming events, etc. As always. But let's jump in straight into the sort of schedule for IETF. I haven't put Sunday on there, but there is, as per usual, Sunday evening. There's the regular sort of welcome event, and also the hot RFC session, which for those of you the ad initiative for IETF events, hot RFC is where people get a 4-minute slot to sort of highlight a particular topic of interest to them. I think the primary purpose is to see if there are sort of kindred spirits that have an interest in the same topic, and they are reasonably strict on the 4 minutes to really keep it quite punchy, and with a sort of fairly rapid fire series of topics, which I along with Arno Tedai from Broadcom, assuming his flight gets him in on time, plan to just signpost our side meeting that we have planned on Monday during the hot RFC session, but more about that in a moment or two. Looking at the Monday agenda, and most of these are largely just meeting headers, because there's still quite a few missing agendas for the various sessions, just to sort of set expectations. So dispatch is usually a good meeting to start with. It will sort of just signpost some of the birds of a feather sessions and other meetings of interest. Also on Monday, you've got the quick working group as session 2, which there wasn't anything specific on the agenda there, but it's obviously sort of generally interesting to see how that is evolving. And then session 3 on Monday is the one of the research groups, so one of the IETF sessions, the DIN RG, which, bear with me, I'm just rapidly looking up because I forgot what the DIN stands for. If I can just see that, yeah, decentralized internet infrastructure. There's no agenda for that yet, but in Philadelphia, that was extremely well attended, mainly because one of the side meetings effectively took over the working group session by agreement, and sort of touched on sort of a number of things around centralization. So assuming that it continues that theme, that could well be worth attending. And then I've highlighted 2 side meetings on Monday as well. At 5:30 till 7 o'clock in the evening, there's a joint session between the Department of Culture, Media and Sport from the UK government and the Internet Society, on a policy program, which I think ISOC is doing for DCMS. And as far as I'm aware, that particular session is open to anyone that is interested as a regular side meeting. And then between 7 and 8 o'clock, we're running a side meeting on Encrypted Client Hello, or ECH, which is what I mentioned. We're signposting on the Sunday night, and that's effectively focused around deployment considerations. So looking at the practicalities of ECH being deployed, and some of the sort of operational systems that could be adversely affected, with a view to start to talk about some of the mitigations for that. And that's part of an effort that we're running to develop an internet draft, which will be sharing the latest update of that in that side meeting, and then hopefully there'll be a sort of further collaboration between now and the next IETF meeting in Japan to get that to a point where it's fit for submission to one of the working groups. Does anyone else, before I move on, have anything else they wanted to call out from the sessions on Monday that I've not spotted?
No, but I will mention, Andrew, that there is something on Sunday that people might be interested in. There's something called the IEPG at 10 o'clock in the morning to 12, which often has DNS-related presentations in it. So that's worth a look if anybody's interested. If you go to www.iepg.org, you'll see what's previously been on that 2-hour session, which is usually quite interesting.
Yeah, a good point. Actually, I'd forgotten about that, Brett. So yeah, well reminded. Thank you. Yeah, so anyone that's in the hotel for the weekend, then that could be well worth dropping in on, or indeed remotely for that matter. Okay, moving ahead to Tuesday. The first session on Tuesday that I've highlighted is the DNS Ops meeting, which has got a pretty packed agenda, which I've called out a couple of topics, but there's plenty more on there. So DNS error reporting continues to make progress. So be interested to see how far that's progressed, because I've not been tracking that too closely. And there are two other talks which I thought were worth highlighting. One is control options for DNS client proxies, which I certainly the agenda didn't link to a paper when I looked at it earlier, but from the title that looks interesting, but I need to see the paper. And the other one, which has featured largely in the DNS Ops mailing list over the last quite a few weeks now, is the alt top level domain proposal. So that's a tentative item on the agenda, which I think Warren Kamari, the AD, is planning to present, time permitting. So that, given that that's, I think, drawn out some quite strongly expressed views, that could be well worth watching if it does come up. And then session 2 is the combined deprive and ADD session. The deprive session doesn't have, or when I last looked, didn't have a lot on the agenda other than sort of past work and future work for the working group. Whereas for ADD, a number of papers, including one on split horizon, which we've sort of talked about previously, a second paper on DNS resolver information, and a third one on DNS server redirection. And I think there was at least one more on the agenda. So there's looks like there's sort of quite a lot of good content for the ADD session on the sort of Tuesday session 2. Gen Dispatch then is session 3, which is which I don't think has split horizon. I think that's a typo on my part. I think it's got. In fact, it doesn't have any of that, so disregard that. I should have deleted that. Sorry, that was me modifying a previous slide. So I don't think it actually had anything listed when I looked at the agenda. So that's a red herring, which I will edit before I share the slides. And then session 4. So most days have got 4 sessions this week to, I think, give more space for more working groups to get time. The IAB Open session has got a variety of things, including an update on the path signals discussion, which you may recall Chris Box talked about a couple of weeks back. So they're reporting back from on that paper. More topically, the M10 workshop, which took place last Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. This is about how to sort of manage encrypted networks. There'll be at least a limited report back on that. And there's also a paper titled Partitioning as an Architecture for Privacy, which is also on the agenda for the IAB Open. And if for any reason you're not attracted to the IAB Open session, there's also the Privacy Preserving Measurement working group taking place during session 4 on Tuesday. And if that hasn't sated your interest for Tuesday, there's an EMODEAR working group side meeting immediately afterwards. That's the Education, Mentoring and Outreach working group, which for some reason hasn't got an agenda slot in the sort of mainstream agenda, but does have a side meeting instead. And that's followed straight away afterwards by the IETF social, which is being hosted by Cisco at the Victoria and Albert Museum. So a short journey from the hotel. Definitely worth going to, and definitely worth getting a ticket if they've not sold out already. No doubt there'll be the usual last minute set of flurry of messages on the mailing list for people who either don't want tickets anymore and want to sell them, or indeed people that are looking for a ticket at the last minute. So definitely worth signing up for that if you've not already done so. Sorry, before I go on, again, did anyone pick up anything else on the Tuesday agenda that you wanted to call out? I'll take silence as probably not, move on, but if you do, just pop something in the chat if something springs to mind. So as we head to the halfway point in the week, Wednesday kicks off with the IETF Open. So that's the Internet Research Task Force. The agenda's not available for that yet, but there's usually some interesting stuff on there. The other session, or the working group that is running in session 1 that I noted, which I know a few people have expressed interest in the past, is the mask working group. So that is also first thing on Wednesday. Followed on in session 2 by the OHI Oblivious working group, which has got a number of things. I put a couple of papers on there, one on the distribution of Oblivious configurations via service binding records and Oblivious relay feedback. There are several other papers on the agenda as well. Session 3, I've got the PEARG research group, again with several papers, one of which is from UNI on measurement of internet shutdowns, which a paper I think could be very similar, if not the same, as the one they presented at RIPE last week, just measuring how effective different techniques are in shutting down access to the internet in a variety of countries. And then session 4 on Wednesday, as always, is the IETF plenary, which is a routine part of the agenda for the IETF meetings. Again, anything else on Wednesday that anyone else picked up on before I move on?
Andrew, I wanted to point out that the IRTF Open has the ANRP papers in it. And I actually forwarded you the announcement. One of them is about called Risky Business, and it's about risk from registrars. And then there's also a paper about amplification DDoS from Anya Feldman's group, which almost always involves DNS in some way. So I think it's an agenda with some significant interest for DNS players.
Brilliant, thank you for that. That'll teach me for not looking at my inbox before starting the call, won't it, Alison? But thank you for that. I'll add that to the notes for other people's interest as well. That's really helpful. And yeah, the award-winning papers are generally good value in terms of their content. Okay, Thursday kicks off with the TLS working group, which amongst other things has got a paper URI for publishing ECH config list. So we'll at least touch on ECH during the TLS working group. At the same time, on the first session on Thursday, the supply chain integrity, transparency and trust working group, which I think was a BOF last time round, I think, has got a session on one of the papers there is about software supply chain use cases for SCIT. So that's starting to sort of build ahead of steam. I've picked out in session 2 the MAP research group, which has got a variety of interesting papers. Again, some of these will be familiar subject matter to some of the people in Belgrade. DNS privacy with speed, so looking at the overhead of DOQ on web performance. And then another paper which has got a provocative title, Quo Vadis IETF, is the IETF ossified, which I'm sure will be quite thought-provoking, judging from a quick scan of the document. Also in session 2, though, if that doesn't get your interest, there's a BOF, the Secure Asset Transfer Protocol. BOF is taking place, so that'll be worth look out the paperwork for. Obviously that's intended to see if there's sufficient interest to warrant forming a working group or taking forward in some other way post this meeting potentially. In session 3, no agenda yet, but the Stay Home Meet Occasionally Online group is meeting. I didn't really pick out anything else in session 3. And then session 4 on Thursday, you've got a choice between Sec Dispatch, which is usually well worth attending, or indeed the MADiness, the MAC address device identification for network and application services. Looking to randomize the sort of MAC addresses for privacy purposes. Again, I think that's been making quite a lot of progress over the last few meetings. And then early evening on Thursday, we've got another, well, put side meeting in quotes. It's technically not a side meeting because it's not formally part of the IETF agenda, but we've got a meeting co-hosted by Article 19 and CDT, which is intended for people that have perhaps got an interest in attending IETF meetings but have yet to do so. So it's going to be a panel discussion to try and sort of help people understand whether it be worth their while coming along to attend, well, either attend IETF meetings and indeed participate in other IETF activities. I just again pause there to see if anyone else has picked up anything on the agenda for Thursday. You can see James just, I think, confirming my recollection that SCIT was indeed a BOF in Philadelphia. Good to know that I didn't completely make that up. Okay, let me just move on to just wrap up then on Friday. So first thing on Friday for people that got staying power before the start of the sort of main proceedings, there's an IETF outreach side meeting. And then session 1, two things that caught my eye. One was the Human Rights Protocol Considerations research group, which has got a number of papers, one of which is In Defense of Freedom of Expression and Association Online, which I think is fairly self-explanatory, the subject matter for that. And at the same time, there's the Security Area Open meeting, which is, amongst other things, got a paper looking at the role of formal verification in the standards process. which again would be quite interesting. So I'm not sure which of those I'll be going to. And then just to wrap things up, session 2, the only thing that I sort of caught my eye there was the Privacy Pass working group. Again, anything that anyone else picked out on the Friday agenda that you think is noteworthy? Seeing a question from Marek. I think in this context, Marek, formal verification, I think, is more in a mathematical sense, as it's in the standards area, open meeting, but I've yet to read the paper, but I suspect that's what it will be, the mathematical proof. I will correct that if that's a wrong interpretation when I actually read the paper in the next couple of days. Okay, if no one else has got anything else to call out, well, what I'll do is, before I circulate these slides, I'll just add links so it will take you to the relevant agendas where they're available. So you can just click on the sort of title of the session and see what the current agenda is. But health warning that as of certainly this afternoon, there's still quite a few working groups yet to publish the agenda, despite the requirement to have had at least a draft agenda put on published by now. So a few chairs are slightly behind where they should be at this point, but I appreciate the challenge in there's a lot of moving parts to organise for these meetings. Anyway, just quickly call out from the OARC and RIPE meetings last week, which were very interesting, being in Belgrade last week. Yeah, I'd not personally been there before. The city, certainly not the wealthiest city, I think it's fair to say, but some interesting places, culturally quite diverse, and certainly in the context of Ukraine, etc. Clearly some divergences of view with perhaps that in sort of countries further west in Europe. So quite interesting sort of graffiti in places, a number of us noted as we were going around. But notwithstanding that, we had sort of 2 very good events, the OARC session and then the RIPE meeting. So OARC was last weekend, so Saturday and Sunday, and then the RIPE meeting ran through Monday through Friday. I don't think the recordings are up yet for the OARC meeting, but sessions I think be well worth your while looking out for. And many of these we mentioned prior to the meeting. So Jeff Huston reprised his Path to Resolve List DNS, which he's presented previously on this call, and it was as well presented at OARC as it was here, albeit I think it's sort of marginally less time on the OARC agenda. Then we had a paper by Martin van der Waal from AFNEC, and this was his intentionally broken DNS server, a configurable sort of broken server that was sort of deliberately configurable, so you could sort of test software to see if it was working correctly or not. So that was quite an interesting idea. You can't break everything in the DNS, but it certainly enabled you to break a number of different aspects of it to see how your software worked. Momaka Yamamoto gave a presentation on an IPv6 only recursive resolver. I didn't realize that was a thing, but it is, and they have an implementation of an IPv6 only resolver. So if that's of interest to you, that will be well worth watching. And then rather helpfully and maybe topically, Benno Overrender gave a 15-minute update on keeping up with DNS in the IETF, and covered quite a lot of ground in 15 minutes, which was quite impressive. So if you want a quick refresh on some of the sort of various IETF related DNS activities, that recording would be worth your while watching. And dare I say it, there was another presentation on the potential impact of encrypted client hello on public and private network operators and others, which I gave, which seemed to be on the whole well received by the OARC audience. I thought they were being kind as it was Sunday morning. Perhaps people were a bit jaded after an excellent social on Saturday night. And then just quickly moving over to RIPE, and then I'll pause and see if any of the other people that were in Belgrade have got anything else they want to mention. Jeff Huston gave a very good presentation, a quick look at Quick. Very data rich as always with Jeff, and yeah, quite thought provoking as always. And then there's a lot of good content in the sort of 90 minutes of the DNS working group. Last Thursday, we mentioned some of these last week as well, unsurprisingly, but yeah, well worth watching. The three in particular, one was, which I think is also coming up at IETF, is looking at the impact of DOQ on web performance. There was also the presentation by Simone Basso on looking at the impact of encrypted DNS on censorship using UNI probes. That's essentially looking at how effective or otherwise internet blocking was in a range of countries, and sort of testing what sort of different aspects of what was and wasn't blocked. And then the final one, which is also on the agenda for DNS OARC, one of the Meta team gave a presentation on Meta's DNS server and announced that that's now been open sourced. So is a new open source DNS server sort of on the blocks, if you like, alongside a number of other excellent options. And I'll stop there for a moment and see if anyone else who was in Belgrade thinks I missed anything that is well worth mentioning. So anyone else that was in Belgrade, either in person or indeed remotely, pick up on any other subject matter that you think was worth highlighting from those two events?
Yeah, maybe if I can add something.
Of course.
Moritz, I'm one of the co-chairs of the DNS working group, and at the RIPE community session, actually, a colleague of mine, my co-chair, Shane Kerr, presented a potential new task force on creating best common practices for open resolver operators. So the idea here is to create a task force, which then potentially will create a document, a best common practice document, that defines technical, but also potentially other management aspects of open resolvers, and potentially also of resolver operators that do not run open resolvers. So I can drop briefly the video where he presents this task force in the chat. And usually how this works is that at some point we will send out the charter of this task force on the RIPE mailing list, and people can then volunteer to join this task force. We will probably select, depending on how many people will volunteer, a small number of people that actually work on this document, but the task force will have to communicate back to the community, for example, via mailing list, publishing minutes of the meetings and so forth, to let the community actually contribute to this document as well, so that we can involve also a broader set of the community. This for your information. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me or drop me an email.
Perfect. And well prompted on that one. I've forgotten that session, which was because I think as a follow-on from the meeting in Berlin, where I think the topic came up. So it was good confirmation, Moritz, that that's now progressing. And I should say congratulations with your involvement as one of the co-chairs. I think this was your second meeting, if I remember rightly. I think.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
It seems like Maurice. It seems like the the best current practice stuff you're working on that Shane suggested has a certain amount of crossover. Bear with me, because I make that phone noise go away. 1 second. It seems there's a certain amount of crossover there between the ICANN kindness program as well. So I assume there'll be some working together with the guys at ICANN on that.
Yeah, we're not sure whether we're going to work directly together with the ICANN folks, but there might be some overlap with kind DNS. There might be some overlap with the European resolver policy.
Yeah.
So we have to see how we, which gaps we have to fill here. And
yeah. Okay, good, thanks.
And seamlessly, as you said that, you'll see I put the reminder of the URL for that in the chat as well, Moritz, as a shameless plug, given a number of people on this call helped develop it, the European Resolver policy, that is specifically. Brilliant, thank you for that. Did anyone else pick up any other sessions from either of the two events last week you want to mention? Just give me a chance to do so if you think there was anything else key to mention. I'll take that as probably not. Okay, fine. Let me reshare my screen again then, just briefly. Right, so just quickly a small number of headlines from the last week. So seamlessly from Moritz's mention, you'll see I put a link to there was a short article about the new RIPE task force, which, if I got the right article, I think it also included some interesting speculation on the DNS4 EU resolver. If I got the sort of correct link, if not, I'll correct that in. But there was some interesting speculation saying that should come to fruition imminently. There are two of the three bids that were submitted have been shortlisted for further evaluation, just by the by, so worth a look. There's also a paper published by Cloudflare on the oblivious HTTP's privacy properties, evaluating those in a formal sense to see how robust they are. Although, in my humble opinion, it doesn't still doesn't address, or as far as I could see, didn't appear to address the issue of colluding proxies, or if you like, the colluding relay and gateway, as they're now referred to, which I think is still a problem in my view with Oblivious, which does need to be fixed. And also Cloudflare put out a piece, a further update on something which we mentioned a few weeks back on their privacy gateway, which uses Oblivious HTTP as part of a service offering that other providers can then utilize to deliver services sort of underpinned by Oblivious HTTP. So they've productized that, if you will. Some of you may have seen that Ian Levy, the sort of long-standing technical director at the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, has announced he's stepping down, and he published a piece last Friday, I think it was, which, amongst other things, mentions the importance of standards, and as well touches on things like DOE and MASK. So you might find it interesting to see some of his thoughts. And then finally, a reminder. Since we mentioned IETF, the cutoff for registration is midnight or 23:59 UTC, more specifically tonight. So if you are intending to register to go either in person or remotely, you need to register today, basically. Otherwise, I believe it won't be possible to do so.
A quick question on that, Andrew. You may not know the answer, but somebody on the call might. If you've registered to be in person, and you can no longer make it in person. I assume you can still attend remotely.
So that happened to me last IETF, and the process was just to email the IETF. They have an alias, and I just emailed them and said, hey, I can't make it anymore. They auto converted the on-site to a remote and refunded the difference.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Tommy.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Oh,
yeah, Michael's got you in chat. Perfect. Thanks. I'll have to look that up now.
Good knowledge. That was impressive. Yeah, and the emails in the chat already. That's very, very impressive. Teamwork between Tommy and yeah, fantastic. Yeah, there you are. So, but don't forget, if you're planning to go and you need to register, and don't miss out because you missed the cutoff. That will be extremely unfortunate. When I last checked, which was I think on Friday, there were about 760 people attending in person, something like that. So the numbers have ticked up again since Philadelphia, which is good. And I think there was also a reasonable number, or obviously less, planning to attend remotely. I think the last couple of meetings that there's been around 1,400 overall in attendance, but each of the last sort of two meetings, and looks like the trend's continuing in London, the mix between in-person and remote attendance has been gradually shifting in favour of in-person. So that will, I think, make some of the discussions that bit more impactful, I hope. Okay, the other thing is not on there, but I've mentioned it in passing. The M10 meeting this, took place over 3 days, week before last, actually, by the IAB, looking at some of the issues in managing networks with the advent of a lot more encryption. The videos are available for that now, and I put the links for those in the sort of news headlines which I sent out earlier today. I don't know if anyone attended and had if there was anything especially noteworthy you wanted to mention, if you were at all or any of those sessions. If anyone happened to be able to join any of those just over a week ago. And if not, I haven't had a chance to do or watch the videos yet, but I think I'll include the links in the sort of page with a link to the recording of this call, because I think it'd be well worth watching, just to see what issues the IAB covered in those 3 sessions, which sort of ran over 3 days. Okay, right, let me just go back to share my screen one last time. If I can see it, for some reason it's not showing up again. Oh, there we are. Good. Okay, so stating the obvious, probably, but the IETF is next week. Who knew? And that's followed shortly afterwards by the ICANN DNS symposium in Brussels over a couple of days in the middle of the month. Then towards the end of the month, you got the EU's high-level group on internet governance. No agenda for that yet. I suspect they're going to touch on DNS for EU amongst other things, but the agenda hasn't been published yet. And then at the very end of November into early December, you got the annual Internet Governance Forum, which so this year's taking place in Addis Ababa. And also just a reminder, there's a call for papers for or issues, if you like, for Eurodig, which takes place middle of next year. That closes today. So if you've got anything you want to put forward to be considered at Eurodig, just use that link to put those forward before midnight tonight. And then I noticed that one of the Asia Pac events, Apricot, has got a call for presentations open currently as well, amongst other events. I have two that I haven't spotted. We won't have a call next week. and then the week after we'll maybe call out some of the highlights from the meeting, just to compare notes on the many stranded IETF meeting. So I think that'd be quite useful, just to sort of go through some of the key highlights and points arising. And then you'll see I've got another session coming up, but that's early next year, so I'll look to add a few more topics to this list in the next week or so, hopefully to take us through to Christmas or thereabouts. Okay, and that was everything from me this week, so a lot talking from me, but has anyone got anything else, any other business, anything to add? And I can see, Tommy, you've quite rightly said that Tor also suffers from the risk of colluding nodes, which is a fair point. I think there are ways you could maybe reduce that risk through discovery mechanisms, etc. But maybe that's a conversation for another day. So anyone else with any other business you want to bring up today? Give you a moment or two if you do. And if not, I think quite a few people on this call are likely to be in London for the IETF meeting. Hopefully you won't be too adversely affected by the, I mean, we've got a few sort of train strikes which are complicating local travel a little, but hopefully we'll all somehow get to the metropole before the sort of the event start, albeit we might be stuck there for a few days afterwards. But details of the train strikes. Oh yes, so there are train strikes on, and not all lines in the UK, on various days. I think, if I remember rightly, I think the 5th being one of the days and the 7th being another. I think the IETF list had some mention of it, the mailing list, and hopefully by now the wiki's been updated. But if anyone hasn't got knowledge on that, but just drop me an email and I'll happily sort of link you to the discussion if that's useful. But don't just get off the plane on Saturday and then be surprised if there aren't so many trains as normal running. There probably will be some, but they might be a bit more crowded than usual, and there'll be a lot more traffic. So taxis probably won't be a good option. Not that they usually are anyway, but they'd be even more expensive than normal, probably coming from Heathrow if you arrive on Saturday. But yeah, as I say, if anyone hasn't picked up on that conversation and wants more details, feel free to drop me a line. Right, well, on that note then, have a fantastic week, everyone, and hopefully some of us will meet up in London next week. Do come along to our sort of ECH themed side meeting on Monday evening. We might start a new tradition of a brandy boff after to a higher class than the whiskey boff that took place in Ripe last week, and there were some very jaded individuals in the meeting the next day. So I thought we should, Monday evening for a brandy boff could be quite good fun, or beer and brandy maybe, a bit of alliteration. Anyway, have a fantastic week, and maybe see some of you face to face in London next week, but not on the call. But we can meet in person instead. But so see you all then. Right. Thanks everyone.
See you next week. Bye.